welcome to Color Light Motion, created and hosted by Victoria Vesna. I'm Bess Rocklitzer, president of the David Vermant Foundation, and today I would like to give a warm welcome to Robin Gose. Robin is the CEO and president of MOXI, the Wolf Museum of Innovation and Exploration here in Santa Barbara. MOXI is filled with interactive experiences relating to art, science, and technology. Thank you, Robin, for your presentation today titled Minds On, Hands On.
Hello and welcome everyone to our STEAM episode of Color Light Motion. David Vermant loved seeing children playing with the kinetic sculptures in his malls and in public spaces. And the foundation has always been interested in supporting education, including very much the MOXI, the Wolf Museum of Innovation and Exploration in Santa Barbara. This is a great example of a museum that allows openness, art, science, and technology to merge in beautiful ways. They opened their doors in 2017, and the foundation was involved from the very beginning. It's a 25,000 square foot building that has 3 floors filled with interactive exhibits, art installations, innovation workshops, makerspace, exploration lab, and just a beautiful exhibit workshop space. So I'm super excited to welcome our featured guest tonight, Robin Gose, who will tell us more about this wonderful space, and also to be joined at the end of her talk by Kaya Joy Veslowski, Nancy Sheldon, and Arthur Affleck, all from the MOXI Museum, or related to it, I should say. So once again, welcome to all of you, and Robin, it's all yours.
Oh, thank you so much, Victoria. Thank you, Bess.
Recording in progress.
And thank you to the David Vermant Foundation for inviting me to be a part of this, and then also, of course, for your support as MOXI was first a glimmer in the eye of the community of Santa Barbara and getting started. So I did put together just kind of a visual PowerPoint, so there's nothing that you'll need to read necessarily, but I thought that providing visuals would always be helpful for those of you who either haven't been to MOXI or who are not even local to the Santa Barbara area. So please indulge me as I share some beautiful pictures of our space with you. Let me pull that up. So again, thank you for having me here. My name is Robin Gose, and it is my distinct honor to serve as president and CEO here at MOXI, the Wolf Museum of Exploration and Innovation in Santa Barbara. We are an interactive science museum here, and we serve the children and families of the Central Coastal region. But what's unique about MOXI is that although we are a science museum, or more accurately, a science, technology, engineering, art, and math museum, is that we focus on process, not content. So what does this mean? It means that we inspire ways of thinking, of ways of looking at the world, so that people, and kids in particular, can approach new situations with curiosity, confidence, and creativity to think critically about potential solutions or approaches to accessing new knowledge. But I'd like to take you on a journey with me. And this journey begins in my childhood. So come back with me to my childhood in Texas, where I was playing in creeks behind my house, catching crayfish. My father was a research scientist with NASA, examining lunar rocks that were brought back from the Apollo missions. He would also bring home liquid nitrogen. He would crack open geodes. He would describe the uplift that I saw in the limestone cliffs and the riverbeds of the Texas Hill Country. We would look for fossils in those riverbeds, and he patiently would explain plate tectonics to me, which as a 4th grader, I just couldn't believe that the Earth's crust could move. It seemed unreal to me, but he did a great job of explaining that. And yet, even in this incredibly rich and supportive home life immersed in science, and as I grew older, to include engineering and technology, when I sat in my science classes at school, I was bored out of my mind. The textbooks and the academic structure of the scientific method did not connect in my mind in any way, shape, or form to my real interests. And if you'd asked a 10-year-old Robin if I liked science, I mean, the answer would have been not really. Because the label of science in my mind, it belonged to school, it belonged to the classroom, and it wasn't about what I was doing. You know, what I like to do in my free time is I like to explore and discover and be curious and learn more about this incredible world that we live in. And what was happening in school, well, that wasn't science, really. But then in 5th grade, my class went on an overnight trip a few hours away. And one of our activity rotations with our naturalist guides was field science. We waded into the Frio River, Frio because it is cold. We were equipped with baggies and nets, and we took water samples and we collected specimens to bring back on shore to observe under a microscope. And I had an epiphany. As I stood in the middle of that river, I looked around at my classmates and I said, it's 10 a.m. We should be sitting in science class back at school, but instead we're wading in a river. How cool is that? And that moment planted a seed for me. I didn't realize it at the time, but that was my life-defining moment. That was my realization that I wanted to experience that joy every day and that I wanted others to feel it too. So here, I'll stop sharing for just a moment so that you can see me a little bit more, and then we'll go back to those pretty pictures. You see, I love science. I love exploration and discovery and learning, and above all, play. And what I love about informal science learning is that none of these things is mutually exclusive. That's also what I love about STEAM, science, technology, engineering, arts, and math, as an integrated approach to learning. As humans, we know instinctively that the world's interconnected in countless ways. And so the traditional approach to formal classroom learning, with those discrete classes throughout the day dedicated to each of these subjects individually, it's counterintuitive, and it's frankly counterproductive to teaching kids how the world works. And this is where informal learning comes in. Informal learning is any learning that takes place outside of the school walls during a person's free time, and usually by the person's choice. This learning is not mandated, nor is it guided by a school curriculum, and it's usually not formally assessed. And my moment in the creek was an informal experience. Visiting the Smithsonian museums in Washington, D.C. as a child were informal learning experiences. Working with my dad, landscaping in our yard, was an informal learning experience. These are what shaped me. And these types of experiences shape many children. Museum field trips, after-school programs, extracurricular activities, libraries. And so creating these experiences, PowerPoint for a minute, creating these experiences is something that's really critical to me for us to do here at MOXI and for us to do for the kids of Santa Barbara. This is the culmination of that seed that was planted so many years ago. I've taught in formal classrooms, I've conducted teacher professional development, but what truly brings me joy is to watch kids discover their own passions, at their own pace, in a place that's designed for them. So what I'm sharing now are some beautiful pictures of happy, joyful children learning and exploring at MOXI. These informal learning spaces are part of an educational ecosystem with schools, home life, and public places such as museums. Each entity in its peak form is working to complement the other facets of the ecosystem, understanding that not one space can provide everything a child needs to thrive and learn. So you can see here that it really is this cluster of all of these spaces, and school is a part of that. But you know, we've seen how much has been put on teachers and the school system over the past, well, certainly over the past 2 years, but really over the past several decades. Schools have become such a hub for so many of the wraparound services for kids, and it's sometimes not fair to expect that the school can provide all of that. And so that's where we have to all come together. We've heard the phrase, it takes a village. Well, it does. It takes a village, and it takes an ecosystem of all these interconnected parts working together to fill in those gaps and to support what kids are doing in each of those spaces. So MOXI is one of these third spaces. It's a place that's not school, it's not home, but it's a place where the community can come to learn, play, and grow in ways that are individualistic. There's no right or wrong way to experience the museum. There's also no right or wrong age to experience the museum. Let me give you an example. So this is Rollerball. This is one of our most popular exhibits here at MOXI, where guests are invited to build a roller coaster using simple materials, a rubber track, various balls of different materials, and some support pegs in this wall. And you can watch as toddlers approach this exhibit. They grab that aluminum pail and they just run around the museum and they collect all of the runaway balls and they plunk them into the pail. Not only is that a satisfying sound, but then they also start sorting and counting and classifying these different balls. That is a developmentally appropriate early math skill. So can toddlers come to MOXI? Absolutely. And they can be growing their STEM skills. And then move up to the 5 and 6-year-olds. They might test a ball on a track that someone else has made. Maybe they don't have the creative confidence yet to build it themselves, but they'll explore and manipulate on a track someone else has built. Now let's get to the 7, 8, 9-year-olds. They're starting to build their own roller coasters. They're experimenting with more daring features like loops and jumps. And then even older kids, now they come to MOXI. They've had an experience in their life somewhere else, riding on a real roller coaster. And now they bring that experience to the roller wall. And now they're trying to build something that looks just like what they rode at Disneyland, or just like what they rode at well, is Astroworld still around? I don't remember. That was, but that was around when I was growing up in Texas. And so that's just incredible to see that progression, to see how one singular exhibit can appeal to all of those ages. And don't even get me started on the adults, because when you see adults at this wall, you can bet that the competitive streak in all of us comes out in full force as they are competing with themselves, with each other, and sometimes competing with the kids too, to try to see how many loops they can create and what the farthest jump may be. So MOXI began as a glimmer in the eye of Santa Barbara residents more than 30 years ago. Through various stops and starts, what originated as the Children's Museum of Santa Barbara really catalyzed when this group of passionate community leaders decided to focus on STEAM as the overarching theme. This is a region that's rich in arts and technology, and this particular focus on STEAM really resonates with our community. And so our approach from the beginning has been a real embodiment of the integrated disciplines of STEAM. That integration is so important so the kids can visualize themselves in any of these different roles and not sort themselves into artists, scientists, engineers, and never the twain shall meet. STEM began as a workforce term to describe those related industries. Employment in STEM fields is tracked by the National Science Foundation, the National Science Board, the U.S. Department of Labor, among others. It's an indicator of kind of economic health and our kind of place in the global economy as well. But then adding in the A turns it from a workforce term into a pedagogy. As STEAM first became part of the conversation 10 or so years ago, initially there was backlash from the STEM community. It was, how dare you suggest that scientists and engineers are not creative or not artistic? And that became a real point of contention. And in truth, some of the early days of STEAM teaching actually did give the arts the short end of the stick, kind of a throwaway, like, oh, let's give kids crayons and a piece of paper so that they can draw their inventions, but not really truly integrating arts into STEM. But as STEAM, as that educational approach, as that has evolved, and as places like MOXI have come online, I think that we do a really good job actually of integrating the arts into STEM. When we first opened in 2017, we are fortunate for the friendship and support of the David Brandt Foundation. And many of the works in his collection actually inspired some of the temporary art installations that we brought to MOXI as part of our interactive media track. And so these are some of the installations that we've had over the past 5 years. So we were seeking out artists who are working at that intersection of art, science, and technology so that we could inspire the kids of Santa Barbara to not only look at the world through a different lens, but to look at materials and media through a different lens as well. This was Alisphere, sort of a mobile version of that from UCSB. Some other ones. We do a lot of light-based projections. This one is Digitasonus, where it would read the fingerprint of your thumb and then kind of relay that into these different sound waves. So lots of really interesting artworks. And like I said, most of the people who we would bring in, I would say, did identify first and foremost as artists, but obviously working with some very high-tech media as well. And then what we would do kind of on the museum side of things is that we would kind of further add to, we would complement that artist installation by maybe having some similar materials or having some other experiences that the guests could engage in that would be reminiscent of or evocative from the artwork itself. We also do a great job of the STEAM integration in our makerspace. This is the innovation workshop at the museum. In this area, visitors may respond to a prompt for something to create, but really this is an open workshop to make whatever they can imagine with the materials provided. And this is an area where you really see a lot of the agency that we are trying to instill in the kids who come through this space. For example, the hot glue guns. We have those out and available for any guest to use when they need to use it for their project. So rather than kind of waiting and asking and perhaps even being fearful of that tool, we've got, they're low temperature. We also have some safety gloves there if the parents or if the children choose to wear them. But this is all, kind of what we would call like a safely dangerous situation. This is an area where taking risks is okay because we have curated that space so that there's not anything that's going to be inherently very dangerous, but just things where, kids are kind of pushing their own boundaries. They're seeing what they can do with the materials. They're seeing what they can do with their own two hands also. You also see a lot of parent-child collaboration in this space. And there is another glue gun. We have more materials than glue guns, but this is one where it really is exciting to kind of see this determination, this perseverance, and again, kind of all through that learner's own perspective and desire. They are building what they would like to make, what they are inspired by through the materials that we have available. And that's also kind of a learning curve with this too, is that the materials that we have change so that it's not necessarily that the kids come in and every time they're going to look for the colorful pony beads or every time that they will have pipe cleaners. It's more about really utilizing the things that are there, the resources that are available, thinking differently about how to use materials or thinking differently about how to build that thing that they have in their minds. This is also where we do a lot of our design challenges, where we do incorporate kind of design thinking and engineering challenges. But again, it's using materials that are easily accessible and usable by the kids, and an area that really does promote that sense of agency. I was actually showing some of my colleagues this space over the past couple of weeks, some friends who are visiting from other museums and looking at the makerspace. And makerspaces have been sort of a popular thing to include in museums over the past 5 to 10 years, and just kind of looking at how it's set up, that it really is in some ways like a well-appointed workshop, a well-appointed classroom. It's a space that has new and novel materials, but is also it's an environment that's recognizable and comfortable and familiar for the kids, so that they can come in. We've got a kind of a pegboard where there's all of the commonly used tools: scissors, pencils, rulers, markers. That's all there just all the time. And kids can go up and get what they need and then put back the materials when they're done. And a subtle unintended outcome of having those materials just always available in that way is that it actually promotes more gender equity in that space as well. Because here's an opportunity where, research, the educational research over the past 30 years, we know that there's not enough female representation in the STEM fields. And a lot of that goes back to girls' experiences in science classrooms as elementary and junior high and high school students. And often girls don't get called on as frequently as boys. Girls don't get to use the materials as frequently as the boys do. When there's a group project and there's, different roles assigned, who do you think most often is the secretary or the recorder for the group? It's often the girl. Now in a situation like this makerspace here at MOXI, you have all of these materials available. A girl can go and get the scissors instead of waiting there with her hand in the air, waiting for the teacher to call on her or waiting for the staff member to approach her and say, what is it that you need? No, she's now empowered to go and get the materials that she needs, gets her one step closer to building and designing what it is that she has in her mind. So that's a really exciting space that we have here. It's, as I said, it's a safe space to explore new materials or learn new skills like sewing or woodworking. But it also is very inspiring to watch adults and kids just immerse themselves in this creative process, sometimes collaboratively and sometimes individually. The interactive exhibits in our museum are not necessarily demonstrating explicit scientific phenomena, but rather they embrace play through the lens of STEAM, but play is that foundation. So let me give you another example. One of our other most popular exhibits is Build It, Test It, Race It. And this is where visitors are invited to build cars with the components available and then send them down a slope to see which car wins. There's no explicit instruction for the visitor to consider weight or aerodynamics or the wheel size on the cars, but that intrinsic motivation to win, that's the fire that fuels each visitor to iterate on their design to build a faster car. Do we have a poster that shows the engineering design cycle with prototyping and iteration spelled out? No, we don't. Because we know that good exhibit design will ignite the desire to keep iterating and that the visitor will have an authentic experience that they can later reflect on, and then they can attach those concepts and vocabulary when it's developmentally appropriate. And that's so much what MOXI is about. It's the experience. It's building what will later become what some educational researchers call the funds of knowledge, or that lived experience that people bring to new situations. By creating playful experiences, we have the opportunity to remove any barriers against science and instead just provide the experience. You don't have to know the vocabulary. You don't have to know all of the, historic scientists and engineers of our time. You don't have to know the exact data collected on the speed of your car, but you have that experience. How much more impactful to remember and visualize your car racing down the track and thinking about why one car went faster than the other than to use the words like gravitational potential, momentum, and velocity without having any of that context. A formula is meaningless unless you see it in action. So I want to touch for a moment on the reason why we emphasize play-based exploration as a way to engage with STEAM. It's not just something we made up, although it certainly is a lot of fun. But informal spaces have become leaders in progressive education, often because we're just more nimble than the traditional public schools are. As our nation emerged from the shackles of No Child Left Behind and began to think about preparing kids for the future rather than preparing them to master standardized tests, science once again began to take precedence. But at this point, the needs of the workplace had changed. No longer was it necessary to equip children to step into engineering careers at age 22, but instead workplaces were asking for critical thinkers, creative problem solvers, people who could communicate with colleagues across the globe, people who could collaborate with others to design the best outcomes. Sometimes these are referred to as the 21st century skills and sometimes referred to as soft skills, but always referred to as necessary to the success of our workforce. Understanding the concepts of science, absolutely important if you are working in a STEM field, but having the formulas memorized, that's less so important. So remember those encyclopedia sets that they used to sell door to door? I don't know about you, but like my parents certainly thought it was a wise investment to have those in our house. Our school library had them too. They are great to read through, but now all of that information, it's in your pocket. It's on your phone. You don't need to have that set of 26 encyclopedias to thumb through. Plus, things are changing so rapidly anyway. What makes science a human endeavor are the humans. The great advances in science arose from curiosity and perseverance. Think about Thomas Edison and his 3,000 versions of the incandescent light bulb. I mean, that is impressive. There's the saying that, what is the definition of insanity is trying the same thing and expecting a different outcome. Well, Thomas Edison, he tried similar things and expected a different outcome. And he did that 3,000 times. So I don't know, is that crazy making or is that genius? There might be a fine line there. So I just want to kind of close with the impact of informal learning spaces, such as museums, such as MOXI, is profound. Because for every child who doesn't identify as a scientist based on what's being taught in the textbook, we're here. For every child who needs a safe place to experiment and try new tools not available at home, we are here. For every child who's inspired by their first walk into a magnificent, beautiful space that is purposely designed with them in mind and invites them to get messy and make mistakes and to play as a way to discover their world and their passions, we are here. So I had wanted to provide that context and that overview of kind of the educational philosophy that we embrace and do here every day at MOXI, and that I think that it really is so amazing to watch all of this in action. And I want to thank you for letting me share that brief little window into what it is to be an informal learning space.
That was really wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Really lovely. It made me think of a class that I teach for a decade now, Introduction to Art, Science, and Technology. It's a general education class, so students from 40 different disciplines come in. And I always ask at the beginning, who had a horrible math and science teacher? And then, and what's your major? Art. And who
Right.
had a horrible art teacher? And what's your major? Science.
Yeah.
So it really is unbelievable how bad these teachers can be, and the education system and the structures, and how they're still existing, even on a university level, which is such a fight, these crystallized structures, the industrial model that just doesn't work anymore. So these spaces are really critical because they allow for a different experience. So even if you find yourself in these crystallized structures, you look for a different way of navigating through these spaces.
Right. Well, and as I was sharing before about the educational ecosystem, I also always want to be I always want to be careful too. Schools have a lot of responsibility that is placed upon them. And I think that I think that we need to give schools and teachers the benefit of the doubt, and also recognize that they are often working within these somewhat Byzantine structures of, state mandated curriculum and, local control, and, funding varies from place to place. So I think that there's so many variables that kind of unfortunately often stack the deck against schools. But then that's where places like museums and libraries and we can help with that, so that it all becomes part of that system, so that it's not kind of saying one area of the ecosystem you're failing or you're not. It's just saying you can't do it all. So how can we step in and help with that and support that? And also even recognizing there are different kinds of learners, right? And that, we can see that here at MOXI. We have, as I mentioned, we don't have a sign that specifically spells out the, design process, or that specifically, writes out the formulas for velocity and momentum and things like that. And for many people, that's fine, because they kind of gravitate toward what we are offering, which is that experience. Just immerse yourself in that experience and walk away and kind of debrief on that and sit with that and reflect on what that experience was like. But then we have other people who really, really want to see everything spelled out on the sign, because that is how they learn. And I think that's where, as an informal space, that we have that balance that we need to do, which is to meet the needs of as many learners as we can while still being true to our own pedagogy. But yet knowing that not everybody who walks in will be an experiential learner. Some people will walk in and be a visual learner or an auditory learner, and that we need to be respectful of that as well.
But that really points to how the structures shape people, and that includes students and teachers. So I still think these structures are outdated and need to be changed.
Oh yeah. I mean, our entire public formal school system, it was based on an economy and an industry that we no longer have. Exactly. Right. I mean, it's, based on this kind of, creating kids for this industrial workforce, that it just doesn't, it's not the right fit anymore. Yeah.
No. Well, universities and schools emerged out of churches, really. When science came, there was no space anymore. And now out of these systems, a whole new thing is coming out that's informal. And actually, Arthur is the perfect person to pass the buck to, because you have the whole big bird's eye view of all the amazing children's museums all over the place that are growing, and the exploration is really at the center of the experience.
Yeah, well, first let me say, Robin, what a tremendous presentation.
Thank you.
Just outstanding recitation of, what is possible at high functioning museums, children's museums, science centers. So really enjoyed hearing that. And it first made me think about my own early upbringing, growing up in public housing in Brooklyn, New York, in poverty. And my first experience was the Brooklyn Children's Museum. And that was an oasis for me. But it also was the place that exposed me to ideas and concepts that I was not exposed to at home with parents who were not educated. And it opened my mind and my eyes to possibilities. The other thing that our museums do, whether you're a Discovery Place or a science center or a traditional children's museum, is that we are places where a child can be a child. For example, the Philadelphia Children's Museum is called Please Touch. Please touch. Most places children go, even at home, don't touch that. Don't sit on that. Just even in school, sit down and be. In our spaces, no, we want to be engaging with young people. We want them to explore. As you said with the young women, we want them not to ask permission, just to grab the glue gun and create and do what you're moved to do. And I love that about these spaces. The other thing I wanted to say about these spaces is that I think Robin said there's no wrong way, like to play in a museum, right? It's just it's all acceptable. It's all about what you're moved to do. And that made me think about this quote that said, all children are gifted. Some just open their presents later than others. Spaces like MOXI help all children find their gifts and their talents and their presents, things they like, things they're good at, things that just excite them. And that, I think, helping young people get excited about learning something new and different can help them on their way to STEM and STEAM or literature or whatever it is they might want to do, but just getting them feeling good about learning and trying and the confidence to try new things. And that's a whole nother thing that places like MOXI help young people do. And I've seen it all over the country and indeed the world. I mean, I loved your build it, test it, racer kit.
yeah.
A lot of museums don't have that. Some do, but I was in Billund, Denmark a month ago at the famous Lego house.
Oh, yeah.
And Lego museum. And one of the most popular things in the Lego house and museum was this this build it, test it, race it thing. And the other point I'm making, then I'll let some others jump in, is that this work and this play and this interactive experience is intergenerational. And we love to see that in so many of our places. It's intergenerational. So it's you know, I know with my children when they were younger, I take my two sons and my daughter to museums, and it was places where they all felt excited and energized, and we could do things together. Not a lot of places where you can do things together like you can in our spaces. So congratulations on all you're doing at MOXI, and I want us to continue to lift up play, because some people think play is just frivolous, but play is learning, full stop. And play is the way children learn and experience their world. And so we've got to do what you do things that are engaging and interactive and science-based and STEAM and STEM-based, but also sometimes they just need pure unadulterated play. They just need, free play, and let them have at it. And in that process, they're learning. And so I love what you're doing. I love what I see around the country. And I have a great job, because my job is to move about the country and support great work being done by leaders like Robin. So thank you for having me here. And I'll stop there because I could keep talking about this important work for the next hour.
Well, I just find it beautiful that your first experience was in the Children's Museum in Brooklyn. That's the very first museum of this kind that I just found out from you earlier. That's beautiful. When was it established? Can you remind me?
It's like 1890 or something like that.
Amazing.
Yes,
Amazing.
yes. And I'm going next week to the Boston Children's Museum for an event, and they will be holding their 90th annual report presentation.
Wow.
Incredible.
So a lot of these institutions have been older, but I think that places like MOXI have learned from what others have done and tried and not done so well, and I think really have raised the bar. And I think that's impressive, and I think that's important to note, that we keep learning how to do these things better and better to engage children and families. So again, I just am so impressed with what I've seen and what I've heard about MOXI.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now,
I just wanted to respond. Arthur, thank you for sharing, and Robin, thanks for the presentation. As the Director of Learning Experience at MOXI, we really think about the role that play has in the space, but also how to integrate that with specifically learning and what we call free choice learning. And as a complement to this ecosystem that Robin was talking about. And one of the examples that I like to use is the analogy of formal learning spaces in classrooms being like a bus, where you hop on the bus and there are stops along the way, and it goes in a line and it makes that loop, and you can get off and you can explore and get back on the bus. And these are sort of the checkpoints that we have when we are in a formal learning space. Make sure that we are hitting our standards. In informal learning spaces like MOXI, it's sort of like getting on a bike. You're still on a mode of transportation, but where you go and how you move in the space is totally up to you. And so you can go off to the side of the road and you smell the taco truck that's down the street, and you go over there. And so learning in these informal spaces allows the visitor to move and explore and understand their world in a way that sort of makes sense to how the visitor learns. And sometimes you throw your bike on the bus because they work together as both means of transportation. And Arthur, as you were talking about like the please touch element of these spaces, I was really thinking about how this informal free choice hands-on space also has a big implication when it comes to accessibility. We had a group of special needs students come through, and the feedback we got was just extensive gratitude for being a place where everything could be touched, where learning didn't have to look like a checklist, and it really allowed their students in any capacity that they wanted to learn to be able to experience science and STEM and exploration in a way that fit their needs. And so I think there's real power to that, and how we make meaning as well. So where we learn is we can get a lot of content, but we have to be able to apply it and have it make sense and play with it. And you know, they, in the same way, like play is the work of kids. We go to work and we do our spreadsheets. Kids are going to work and playing. And you see that at MOXI. And so when we think about program design, again, it's this complement of bringing in programs like our field trips that are supporting this formal ecosystem, that are supporting the checklist, but are really unique, that have an integrated element of play, even in our formal classroom settings that support our field trips. So I think, yeah, just continuing to think of the STEAM learning environment as a way to augment the learning that we do across the space, whether it's in the classroom, whether it's visiting other informal learning institutions or cultural institutions. And we hear that feedback. So it's really fun to be a part of that.
You know, I was thinking as you were talking that we also don't want to lose the some of the other benefits of the work that you do in your museums, helping young people build socio-emotional skills and cognitive development, especially for the earliest learners. And I know Robin was talking about, you know, the ecosystem and school and home and all these other places, but if we do our job well in the informal spaces at home and before they ever get to school, young people have to be prepared for a certain level of proficiency, if you will, because there's a lot of data to show that if you show up at kindergarten and you haven't, you know, been exposed to some of these experiences, and you don't have the, you know, you don't play nice in the sandbox, you don't know how to collaborate, you don't know how to communicate, you don't have some literacy, numeracy skills, you approach kindergarten and you're below your peers, the system doesn't help you catch up. And probably half or more of those kids never catch up if they show up at kindergarten not ready. So spaces like MOXI and education, museum educators around the country, you know, have a school readiness program approach, if you will, sometimes intentional, sometimes just based on the work that we're doing. And I think that's another very important component and role that we play, sometimes intentionally, sometimes not intentionally, getting kids school ready, if you will, by exposing them to all these things in all these ways. And like giving, you know, girls and boys confidence to try stuff and, you know, and to learn that way. So there's so many benefits from the work that you all do and others do.
I agree. It's also, I think, there's some learning that we know that the kids are experiencing, and then I think that there's kind of that complementary piece of the parents learning what their kids are learning, right? And the parents understanding what the impact of our informal learning spaces really is, and that you know, informal spaces will look differently than a formal learning space. And, you know, KJ was talking about there's not a checklist here, right? And that's true. And for some of the parents or the adults that bring children here to MOXI and to other children's museums, often there is an expectation of, okay, well, we're going to walk out the door and tell me what my kid is going to know. Tell me what my kid will have learned after this experience. And sometimes, to your point, Arthur, it's those social emotional skills. It's things that are less easy to pinpoint in the moment, but do so much to build that foundational skill set that kids will need and again, it's regardless of whether they at age 5 want to go into a STEM career or not. It's more about, can they go into a kindergarten classroom and not, steal pencils from the kid next to them, and that is important. That is real learning. And they'll get to the point where they either have the specific interest to learn more about Newton's laws of motion, or not. And that's okay too. That all of that, it's kind of when they are interested and when they are ready, they will find the content that they need and that they want.
Nancy, we haven't heard from you.
I'm sitting here amazed at everything I'm hearing from everyone else. I was on the founding board of MOXI, and I helped bring them to fruition. And I have to say that I never imagined the impact it would have on people's lives in our community. And I'm just really proud to hear it. I remember this was a 10-year experience to it from concept, okay. And I remember my son, Max, when I was deciding whether or not to get involved, I asked him what he liked about going to children's museums and science centers. And he said to me, "Mom, I just like walking through those doors." And it was truly from that moment on that I knew I had to do this, because I had this child who was lucky enough to have walked through those doors. And I knew in my community, so many kids would not have that experience if we didn't bring it to them. And I feel like we've accomplished that. We've for our community, and we had to convince a lot of people that this was needed too, because to tell, most of our funding came from people who were older in our community, because they're the ones that have the ability to give in such large ways. And we have a very philanthropic town, except they didn't know why in the world we would need a Please Touch Science Center in Santa Barbara, why that was such a hole in our community, and educating them in that process and getting them to come aboard just on faith that this is something that would change our community was very interesting, very hard, and pay off in spades. And I really have people like Robin and Kaya Joy to thank for that. And the Vermont Foundation, who was an early participant and helped us tremendously. So that's what I have to share.
Nancy, let me just say. Please. No, please go ahead.
Oh, well, I just wanted to say, that even though you didn't know David Vermont personally, Robin did visit the collection, where I'm sure you saw he loves play, interactive art, George Rhodes pieces, and all the things MOXI brings to the community. So I know he would have been a great fan. Definitely.
I was just going to say thank you, Nancy, for your leadership and your support of this important space. Yes. And I was going to tell just a little quick story. So because I knew the importance of children's museums, and my wife did as well, we took our children to children's museums. I have a picture of my oldest son, my namesake, Arthur George Affleck IV, no pressure, right? I have a picture of him in the Discovery Children's Museum in Charlotte, North Carolina, where we lived for like 15 years, in a shark cage, and he loved marine science. Well, he went on to the University of Miami to study marine science, and then he went to medical school. Today, he's a surgical resident in Portland, Oregon, saving lives. And he remembers all of those days and trips to the museum as helping to keep him along the path around STEM and STEAM. So you may not hear all those stories like that, but you are saving lives and changing lives. And people will come back eventually and say, because of what you did for me at MOXI, I'm now doing this important work at NASA or in medicine or, in some other field. So, the benefits are real tangible. So thank you, Nancy, and thank you, both Robin and KJ, for the work you do. It's critical.
Well, thank you, Arthur. I feel like you have like you have a window into my brain and into my hopes and dreams for MOXI. That's something that we talk about. We are only 5 years old. But even a few years ago, as we were writing the first strategic plan for the museum, and I was energetically drawing on our whiteboard and talking about where we could go and what might be. And I remember I drew kind of these concentric circles, these rings of impact, and talking about kind of exactly what you were describing with your son is, we were still too young, and frankly, we probably are still too young to have that, what I call the unicorn, like that kid who, 20 years from now, 30 years from now will say, oh, you know what? It was that museum in Santa Barbara that just was my moment. Like, I can't wait until we find that kid for Santa Barbara.
Well, you will. And I'll just say this, there's a quote I love from Maya Angelou. She says, people will not long remember what you said or what you did, but they will remember how you made them feel.
Mm-hmm.
And the work you do and the way you do the work, children and families feel, right? Feel seen, feel included, feel engaged, feel, just great joy. We want to talk about, we don't talk about joy enough in learning, that the learning in your museum is joyful. You see nothing but smiles, on the faces of children and families. And that joy is important. And we haven't mentioned this yet, but in light of the pandemic, the mental health crisis, right? The educational deficit crisis, places like MOXI help with all of that. You don't solve those problems, but you're part of the solution, helping children and families to feel better about themselves, to feel more hopeful about the future, and to help make up some of those educational deficits. So I just can't say enough that we need more places like this. And I know that you will have every year from now on stories to tell about young people and their families who came through, and will have stories about what a difference it made in their lives. So I can't wait to come back 5 years from now and hear more of your stories.
We have a comment and a question from Andrew Berman to David's son, who said he loves MOXI, and that we were involved with the Children's Museum back when the museum was located in the Lacumber Mall. What developed is spectacular, and he had a quick question. How often do you change exhibits or have special exhibits? And have you considered a collaboration with the Andrew Berman, the Dos Pueblos Engineering Academy?
That's a great question. So yeah, we have, as I mentioned, and I showed some photos of some of the temporary art installations that we have had in the past, and that's been through our interactive media program that we have. We worked very, very closely in the early years with the University of California, Santa Barbara, and many of the students who were graduating from the Media and Arts Technology program. A lot of those students were coming through as temporary artists that we were showcasing here in the museum in some of those spaces. And then we did kind of expand that net a little bit too, because we were getting some great works, but also it fairly small pool of applicants to select from. So we did expand that call to be a nationwide call. And so we have had some artists from actually North Carolina a few years ago. And then most recently we had an artist from Austin worked with in my previous role in a museum in Austin. And so it's been great to kind of bring those in and see those changing out, sort of every like 4 to 6 months or so. I'm also excited because right now we've been kind of working on our in-house fabrication skills as well. And our exhibits team has put together some very fun temporary installations in that space. And then we're also, we're actually looking ahead. I referenced a few moments ago about a strategic plan for the museum. And part of that strategic plan includes thinking about how we continue to refresh our spaces and our exhibits and those learning experiences over the next 5 years. And so we actually do have, an exhibit master plan that kind of gives us a great roadmap into how we can kind of turn over about 20% or so of our permanent exhibits over the next few years. And we've got some big plans. We're working with some fantastic designers out of Salt Lake City, some people who've been in the museum industry for years. And so really working at kind of bringing together what we now feel more confident is MOXI's educational philosophy, and matching that with our visitor feedback and with the needs of our community, and really kind of thinking about some very cool new interactive experiences that we can add to the museum floor.
So we were just joined by Andrew. Andrew, I read your question, but now you can continue the conversation. Welcome.
Well, but also, Robin, you did collaborate with the Dos Pueblos Engineering Academy?
We have. Yes, we did. Yeah.
Okay.
For a couple of years, we were working with the Engineering Academy. COVID sort of shut that down a bit, but
Right.
But yeah, so we were, that was a really great experience, I think, kind of on both sides, where we were able to work with a local high school and get, and really kind of give those students the opportunity for a real world application of their skills, and kind of really thinking about how to do work for a client. And so there was we were kind of building in what that two-way feedback would look like, so that it really became this collaborative design process, so that we would get interactive installations for the museum floor that kind of met a lot of the criteria that a museum needs, which is needs to be robust enough to handle 1,000+ visitors a day, kind of banging on it and playing with it, and it needs to kind of follow what our educational philosophy is, and it also just needs to be interesting and compelling. And so I think that was a really fun kind of 2-year project that we had with the Engineering Academy to get several of their of the student pieces designed, built, and on display here at MOXI.
Oh, you're muted, Andrew.
Andrew, you're on mute.
Yep, I just saw that. Thank you. Yeah, I have to say that I have been a big fan of MOXI, since it opened, and I don't go enough. Actually, when we first moved to Santa Barbara, my wife at the time, Melissa, she was the executive director of the Children's Museum when it was in the La Cumbre Plaza. Back in the day when Steve Cushman was So our history goes actually way back. The strides that you've made are just tremendous. I mean, what the board has done in terms of raising the funds and building the new museum is just extraordinary. And all I can say is that I think my father would be enormously proud and pleased with what you've done. And one of his goals, and if you go back and you watch the video when he was interviewed by Charles Kuralt on CBS Sunday Morning, and he was sitting in Long Ridge Plaza in Rochester, New York, and all the art was out there, and they filmed all these children walking up to the pieces and putting their hands all over the pieces to feel them, touch them, listen to the sound. Adults as well. I mean, people were just mesmerized by these pieces. And one of my dad's primary goals was, number one, he of course loved the movement and sound and energy of the art ever since he first saw it, his first piece in Israel way back when, in the 1960s. But he endeavored to take the art out of the museum, so to speak, and actually put it in the public realm. And art that people could again have some sensory experience with, be a touching sound, whatever it might be. And he got an absolute kick out of it when children would go up to the piece. And I was lucky enough to grow up with all this art in my house, although I wasn't allowed to play with it very much, and I had to be careful. I didn't crash into things, which I did. So, but anyway, so he'd be very proud, and I know he'd be very, very pleased with. I wish he could see what you guys have done, because he'd be there every day watching, and really enthusiastic and loving it. So it's great.
Well,
Thank
that's very kind of you to share. Thank you so much, Andrew. That really means a lot.
Yeah.
What a nice way to wrap up this amazing meeting of science, technology, engineering, arts, math, everything combined in play and in the beautiful space, and giving some light and hope in this time of, real kind of anxiety and the sense of a lot of young people feeling like there's no future. To create these kind of spaces that are open and playful, I think it's such a key and so important. And thank you for doing this great job, for the beautiful presentation, Robin, to the foundation, of course, for supporting this kind of education. And we're actually doing a whole series that's focusing on STEAM. So this is a wonderful, wonderful episode. Thank you so much.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Arthur, Nancy, and Kaya Joy for joining us. I really appreciate your time supporting me and MOXI. All right. Thank you, Bess. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Victoria.
Bye, everybody.